What's up, everybody? I am Brett L. Pape. That's Coach Bruce, and this is the Coach Approach. Coach, how are you, brother?
I'm good, man. Sorry, I was dancing to the intro music, bro. It's always good when you hear that thing going. That means it's time to talk some football. That's right, man. What's going on with you, man? What's new and exciting?
Same
How
old,
was
same old.
Thanksgiving?
Just kind of getting through the week. You know, I've got 3 more weeks after this one, and then I got 3 weeks off. So trying to fight through the little fall blues. Other than that, everything's going great. Looking forward to talking a little fantasy and real football tonight. Everyone who's tuning in, thank you so much for coming in. Feel free, start your sit questions, post your trade questions, anything you guys want to talk about. We're here for you and looking forward to the show. But let's get right into it, Coach. Carolina fired Frank Reich. He's 1-10. Kind of struggled, obviously. And the thing that they've struggled the most with is the development of Bryce Young. You know, you look at his stats, they're not awful. You look at his supporting cast, it is awful. But the big thing Bryce Young's got going against them right now is the fact that the number 2 pick, C.J. Stroud, has looked so good. He's the walk-away rookie of the year. Earlier in the year, I said Puka, you said CJ. Now there's no doubt it's CJ. And I think that comparison for, a meddling owner and that not having the same type of results has made it to where Bryce Young is obviously being picked apart pretty heavily. And I think Frank Reich being fired had a lot to do with it. But what an ugly mess. Not a real good time to be a fan of the Carolina Panthers.
No, it's not. And you've traded away your draft capital, which makes it even worse. So instead of being a 1-10 team tanking for Caleb or whatever you want to call it, you don't even have you can't even do that. So, it's interesting. There's a couple things, rumors, swirled around about, the leadership of that organization coming to Frank Reich and asking him to put in more quarterback friendly concepts and to make throws easier for Bryce Young and adding RPO concepts. And, as a high school football coach and offensive coordinator, I understand what the question is. And the response supposedly was Frank Reich saying, hey, it doesn't really fit into the concepts of what I'm doing. And, if that actually happened, I have a little bit of concern there because as a guy that's had a lot of success with some quarterbacks in the NFL level, it's real simple to throw RPOs into your concept. So it's interesting to see if that's, if there's any truth to that. I think if Frank Reich does come out and say anything and, is he going to he's probably going to toe the line and do coach speak and just say, hey, it was a decision that unfortunately I'm not happy with. And, you move on. I don't know how deep into that he'll get, but the other part of that is we talk about C.J. Stroud and you talk about what if that was switched? What if you took C.J. Stroud and put him in Carolina and he's throwing to Adam Thielen and Jonathan Mingo and Hayden Hurst versus, now all of a sudden he'd be throwing to Tank Dell, Dalton Schultz, and Nico Collins in Houston with Slovic, who's done a great job as an offensive coordinator in that program. So yeah. I think putting a little bit too much pressure on Bryce Young right now. I think there's a little too many people that are just getting some take lock right now. And I think you need to be patient with him. The organization's not in a great position. He doesn't have a lot of talent around him to get the ball to. Miles Sanders hasn't been who we thought he was going to be. So I think you got to wait it out with Bryce Young, and I think he's going to be fine. But, to your point, here that C.J. Stroud is having, he's definitely locked up rookie of the year. I think even if he got hurt and missed the rest of the year, he'd still get it. I don't know how you couldn't give it to him at this point.
Coach, don't even mention such a thing.
I know. I'm just saying. That's how much of a lock I think he is.
Gee, I need a drink just thinking about it.
Right? All right, I'll join you. Here we go.
All right. So, Carolina, awful situation. Now we talk about possible coaches going there. If you're a coach and you're looking at that situation, you see a guy who is, fired a coach midway through 2 seasons in a row. You see a guy who doesn't really seem to know what he's doing as far as it relates to the game of football, and he's running the show there. That would leave me with some concerns. You also see the fact that the roster, I was listening to, we both listen to podcasts all week, and I was listening to The Athletic earlier this week, and they're talking about general managers just, discreetly or amongst themselves saying that's by far the worst roster in the NFL. So why would I want to go if I'm a Ben Johnson or if I'm, whoever
Bobby Slovic, Yeah.
Why would I want to leave and go to that place? Because if you also saw a tweet today or yesterday regarding the number of coaches that are expected to be fired, they're talking 7 to 10 jobs that could possibly open up. I don't think it's going to be. It's going to be interesting to see who they get there in Carolina, because I don't think I would go.
I think you got to get an offensive guy, and I think Kellen Moore's going to have his name thrown out, but obviously I don't think Brandon Staley makes it through the year, and if he does, I think this is his last year with the Chargers. And then you've got a guy like Eric Bieniemy that has been very open about wanting to be a head coach. I don't know if he's the right fit, but I'd want a guy that's an offensive-minded guy, but also has developed quarterbacks at a high level and been very hands-on with quarterbacks. That's why I take Eric Bieniemy kind of out of that equation as a former running back. I think Andy Reid was a lot more a part of Patrick Mahomes being who he is and Eric Bieniemy was. So that's not a guy that I think would be a great fit just from that perspective. But a guy like Bobby Slovic, Ben Johnson, who you mentioned, I think are two candidates that are certainly at the top of the list for me.
Yeah, I just find it hard to believe that any of them would want to go. Because you brought up Brandon Staley. Where would you rather go? Would you rather go to Carolina, or would you rather go to Los Angeles and coach Justin Herbert?
Well, Los Angeles may make that decision because they promote Kellen Moore and give him an opportunity. That takes one coaching candidate off the carousel, right? So that's the thing. You're banking on a guy that's either young and up and coming, if you go that route, or a guy that doesn't have head coaching experience like the guys we're talking about. I think it becomes tough. Like I guarantee you right now, if you ask Eric Bieniemy, he would jump at it because he's dying for an opportunity. We don't know that Ben Johnson and Bobby Slovic aren't kind of in that same category, but it's gonna. I agree. If it's me and I've got a really good resume and I've been around for a while and I've had a good track record, that's probably not where I'm going to go. So you're probably going to have to go with somebody who's young and up and coming that is just looking for his first chance to get a head coaching job. But sometimes be careful what you ask for, because there's coaches got put into bad situations for the first start and they haven't recovered from it. So we'll see how that goes. It'll be interesting.
All right, let's get into our first question before we move on to the injuries of the week. And that's John. What's wrong with Mixon? Can I trust him here in the last 6 weeks without Burrows? The question there, it's funny because when we do our risers and fallers, I have Joe Mixon as a faller. So we're obviously going to get into that later. But my concern is twofold. And I do think without Burrow, you're not having the same success with the passing game. If I'm a defensive coordinator right now, I have no issues with loading up the box and taking Joe Mixon away. And now I'm just going to make a guy who, yes, he had a lot of experience at the University of Washington. But, I mean, this is not a guy who's NFL ready to play, in my opinion. So I would put everything on his shoulders. And now what you got is you got Mixon not seeing any type of lanes. So I am concerned about Mixon over the last 6 weeks. I'm concerned that he's getting a little bit older. But mostly, yes, it's a problem with the offense more so than Win Mixon for me.
No, you hit on the head, and that's just it. You're going to load the box up, and you're going to make Jake Browning has very little. He's got one start to his NFL career. Before that, he had a hard time sticking with franchises. So had a lot of success in college, to your point. But, it's very simple formula. If you're playing against Cincinnati, who's been struggling all season, is obviously Joe Burrow had the calf strain earlier in the year, and now he's out. But that's what you're going to do. You're going to force Jake Brown to beat you. And so Mixon, if he's going to be relevant at all, it's going to be in the passing game and PPR formats. I don't expect a lot out of him in the run game because I just don't see you're going to see the run lanes available there.
I look, they did him. I don't know if they did him a favor, but I don't see him coming back next year because they're not going to. I should say he did them a favor by taking a pay cut just to come back this year. With that being said, I would not be surprised if you do not see him in their backfield next year. And so I would, I went out of my way. I don't know if you've got a shallow kind of roster. You and I are in all these sleeper dynasty super flex leagues with 30 to 40 man rosters. In typical home leagues, or at least in my home league, I've got 22 man roster. I don't have the ability to, have a bunch of guys and hope that they hit later on. So what I'm getting at is I picked up Chase Brown a week ago, knowing where they're at with their offense and knowing that Mixon probably isn't going to be back next year, because I think they're going to give him a little play over the next few weeks, and we might find out that he could be someone they can lean on next year. So I think Chase Brown's worth picking up right now.
Yeah, I've got concerns with Mixon's rest of the season as well for all the points we've just made. I mean, I don't see it as a great situation for him at all. I mean, he's going to get volume, but again, they lose a few more games. You're going to want to see what you got in Chase Brown, especially for moving on from Joe Mix, which I think right now you're in a market in the NFL. Running backs are just not compensated. So I agree with you.
And they have some, they just paid a quarterback a lot of money.
Sure
So,
did.
and they got to think about whether or not they're going to bring T. Higgins back.
I was just going to say that.
So Joe Mixon, if they were winning, I would love to have him right now, because then I think he could be a guy that they're going to want to force feed, knowing that they're not going to have to worry about him giving them more carries in the future. But with their situation, no, I don't like his situation at all. And I mean, if you have other options, I would certainly look that other way. But it's definitely something to monitor. Another thing to monitor. Let's move on in our injury report. Chris Olave, concussion protocol. Limited practice today. And typically, if you look at the practice reports every day and you see limited on a Wednesday is not necessarily a bad thing, especially if you're in concussion protocol. So I wouldn't be surprised if he plays this week, but it's also something that you got to continue to monitor. So pay attention to either practice reports or early Sunday morning. Make sure you're looking at those lists of inactives. Coach, if Chris Olave is not there, we're going to get to another receiver, Rashid Shaheed, thigh injury. He's not going to play this week. Did not practice today. Don't expect him to play. Two receivers out in that offense. Who can Derek Carr throw to this week?
Well, and you've also got now Michael Thomas on IR, so you're down your top three receivers. But so Alvin Kamara is the only running back that's got 14 targets in 2 different games, and so I think you're going to lean heavily on him in the passing game. You've got Taysom Hill, and hey, Juwan Johnson's back. If you're asking me, I think Juwan Johnson could have a big game this week. And outside of that, you've got A.T. Perry, the rookie, who's flashed, but then you've got Keith Kirkwood, Lynn Bowden Jr., right? So to me, it's going to be a lot of Alvin Kamara. It's going to be Juwan Johnson. It's going to be Taysom Hill. They're going to put more packages in. I think even more so with Taysom Hill, it's so limited at what they've got in the wide receiver room that you're going to lean on 12 personnel, if you want to call it that. But Taysom Hill can line up at quarterback, and you can get creative, from an offensive perspective there. But A.T. Perry in deeper leagues, if you've got deeper leagues, you got 6 teams on bye this week, and so I mean he may be a guy you could flash. Or I like A.T. Perry even in a DFS format. You're going to get a lot of value for him, and I think you're going to get value for Juwan Johnson. Those guys that could pop that cost you very little money.
I like it, as we were just talking about Juwan Johnson earlier in the night regarding my home league. Let's move on to the next thing. That's Demario Douglas. Upper body injury, check practice reports. Did not practice today. I don't think he's going to play. I think people who've had to play Demario Douglas in fantasy are obviously having to use him because of injuries or buys. He's never more than a flex play at this point, especially in a terrible offense. But without Demario, is there anyone that who are they going to turn to in that offense?
Well, it's Ramondre Stevenson, right? I mean, the other guys, you've got Hunter Henry and you've got Mike Gesicki, but I think the issue there is Demario Douglas, 6 or more targets in the last 5 games. He's got 38 targets, 26 grabs, 267 yards. He hasn't scored on the season. This is a 6th-round pick. This is pick 210 in the draft. And for comparison, you've got Jackson Smith-Njigba over in Seattle, where the last 5 games he's only got 25 targets, 18 grabs, 233 yards, and a touchdown. And he was a 20th pick overall in round 1 and playing an offense last year with Geno Smith when he had his breakout year at the age that he was at. Was an offense you were excited about. Demario Douglas is outplaying JSN. JSN is playing a lot more snaps over the course of the season. But I'm excited for Demario Douglas. I think he's got an opportunity to be really, really good. Hopefully he gets an opportunity to see a lot more of him. I think he's the guy, because otherwise you're left Devontae Parker, Juju Smith-Schuster, Tyquan Thornton, Kayshon Boutte. We know how bad that draft profile was and what he did last year at LSU, but it's bare. And then you've got the quarterback issues with Bailey Zappi coming in to relieve Mac Jones once again.
First, let me just stop you and say, why are we bringing in JSN? JSN was not a part of this talk. You're comparing. It's not apples to apples.
Comparing how good Demario Douglas has been over the last 5 games compared to a guy that was a 20th overall pick in Seattle. He's outplaying that guy. So it hurts if you are a guy that's Demario Douglas owner. Like I picked him up in a couple leagues on the waiver wire.
Sure. No, I get that. I love what we've seen from him. And, he has flashed all year long, maybe not in the stat book, but if you read the reports in training camp, he was someone that they were talking about from day one. So he's obviously someone who's been, on the radar, and I love him. But I think JSN, The issues I have with him is that you talked about it, the breakout year of his quarterback last year. His quarterback is playing nowhere near at that level this year. But yeah, Demario, my biggest point is, though, that if you're playing Demario Douglas, yeah, if I had him in Dynasty, I'd be excited about the prospects going down in the future. But that offense is so bad, it's hard to really play anyone in there unless it's Ramondre Stevenson.
Yeah, he's the only guy I got any confidence playing. That's a volume play. So, and he's a guy that can help you out in the passing game, especially in half point PPR and full point PPR formats.
All right, hey, let's move on to our next one. And this one hurts me. It hurts a lot of people because talk about a guy who's gone from, really climbing the dynasty ranks and climbing the positional dynasty ranks, and that's Trey McBride. I think Trey McBride probably going into the year was probably maybe top 20, that 18 to 20 range as far as dynasty tight end rankings. Came out of Colorado State 2 years ago. You had Zach Ertz with the offense last year pretty much, and he didn't really get to flash much. But this year, Trey McBride has just really lit it up over the last 5 to 6 weeks. And unfortunately, he's sustained a groin injury groin issue over the last 2 days. Did not practice today. Monitor until Sunday as far as look at those practice reports, and then most importantly, check the inactives as soon as you can on Sunday to see if you have a pivot off him. But losing Trey McBride in the playoff push, that hurts a lot of people right now.
No, he scored double digits in 3 of the last 5 games. It's a good matchup this week against Pittsburgh. And if you look at, even his last 2 games with Kyler Murray, he's got 16 targets, 12 grabs, and 103 yards. Game before that, he was 9 targets, 8 grabs, 131 yards. So this is a guy that was really on the up and up. Zach Ertz obviously goes out. He's still out. So now you're looking at, for the Cardinals, Jeff Swaim or Elijah Higgins. So it's not good. So if you've got Marquise Brown, look to him to get a lot of targets this week. They're going to find ways to manufacture touches there. If Michael Wilson, I know he's been a little bit banged up, if he can get some opportunity there, and you're going to have to continue to rely on guys like Greg Dortch and the little guys there they've got playing in the slot. But it's tough, man. I had just traded and just got lucky. I traded Trey McBride. I had Sam Laporta in one quarterback league, who's obviously passes bye week. There's no reason to hold on to 2 tight ends in a 1 tight end league. It's not tight end premium. So I was able to flip Trey McBride for a receiver for Jordan Addison. The guy had too many wide receivers, and so he flipped.
There you go. I like that.
I'll take that all day long.
I don't mind having multiple tight ends because I still think a guy like Dalton Kincaid, just as long as we're talking about 1 tight end leagues, I have a 1 tight end league in my home league, and I have Dalton Kincaid and Trey McBride and Luke Musgrave. Until I know I have like a Travis Kelce, I'd rather hold on to 2 young studs like a McBride and a Kincaid and really find out if I've got someone who's going to develop and beat Kelce week in and week out. So when you said you traded McBride, even in a 1 tight end league, I was like, oh, I hope you got something good. I like.
Well, it's redraft, yeah. Dynasty.
Oh, it's redraft.
Yeah,
that changes everything. All right, let's move on then. I apologize for taking too much time. And Trey McBride, love the guy. Hope he can get back by this week though. Not an injury report, but we let off last week with another firing story, and that was with Matthew Canada in Pittsburgh. They come back the following week. Of course, they get a win because somehow, some way, they always seem to win. But their offense finally outgained the other offense for the first time this year. More than 400 yards. You saw Pat Freiermuth. I'm going to talk about him later, but him in the middle of the field kind of really opened things up. That offense looked a heck of a lot better. Is it something that you think can go on and continue the rest of the year?
It is something I think can continue. Now, you've got to get improved play by Kenny Pickett, which you had last week. But Pat Freiermuth as a tight end, what he brings that offense, to your point, and what he can create in the middle of the field is a bit, and especially in the red zone, is a big part of that. And then you've got George Pickens on the outside. So you've got your vertical stretch guy. You've got your seam guy at the tight end position that also give you some looks underneath coverage. And then you've got Deontay Johnson, who is a move the chains type of guy. So all of a sudden, then you got Najee Harris, Jalen Warren. There's a lot of things you can do. So it's almost like with Matt Cannon. It's like, how are you not scoring more points? How are you not getting the ball in the hands of your playmakers? How are you not creating free releases for the guys you've got at the wide receiver position? And and there's so many examples of guys that are so good in that. in terms of putting offenses together. That why he's not copycatting some of those concepts doesn't make any sense. But it's been a rough run with Matt Canada. So I think as a Steelers fan, especially, you're very happy to move on. I think it can continue because you've got everybody healthy, and you've got an opportunity there with 5 guys on the offensive side of the ball you can feel comfortable throwing the ball to. So it's, and their defense is playing well. So there's an opportunity there for
Well,
Pittsburgh
their defense has always
to
been
continue to
playing
play well,
Yeah,
100%.
they're all. I mean, they're AFC North team, true and true. Meaning
Yep.
they want to run right at you and they want to play good defense. They've been able to run right at you for much of the season. They played great defense. The issues have been with their passing game. They've corrected one of it by moving on from Matt Canada. You saw improvement. And Freiermuth really, I've already mentioned one of my fallers. Now here's one of my risers, and that's Freiermuth. But it all comes down to Kenny Pickett, and we mentioned that last week. Now we get to really find out, can they depend on him to get the ball out to their playmakers? And, it'll be interesting to see that whole dynamics over the next few weeks.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's going to be interesting offense to watch. But, yeah, I think they can continue to move the ball certainly better than they did under Matt Canada.
All right. Hey, let's move into our Week 12 recap. I think probably 9 out of the first 11 weeks, I picked the Green Bay Packers to win. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, you did, man. You were on the
And
Packers train for sure.
one of the few times I haven't picked the Packers to win, they come out and they put on a really nice performance against the Detroit Lions in front of a bunch of eyes on national TV, Thanksgiving morning, and they come out and get a nice 29-22 win. Jordan Love, 22 out of 32, 268 yards, 3 touchdowns. I don't know if you saw the tweet that's been kind of floating around, but comparing his numbers
Exact same as Aaron Rodgers. Yeah.
Aaron Rodgers' numbers, the record of the team, the numbers are almost identical. 19 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. I got a little impatient with him because he did have a tough stretch in the middle of the year, but that young offense is finally, hopefully this is the start of something, but a great win for Green Bay, who now are 5-6, and a tough loss for a team that, obviously thinks that they can compete in the NFC and have a possible run at a Super Bowl.
No, and if you go to the other side of the ball, the Detroit Lions, and they come in at 8-2, they're playing a home game against the Packers team. And if you told me after the game and you said, hey, Jared Goff threw for 332 yards, 2 touchdowns, Montgomery was 15 of 71 with a touchdown, Amon was 9 for 95, you're thinking Lions won this game. And the reality is they didn't. They had almost 100 yards more in total yards. They had more passing yards. They had more rushing yards. But they only averaged 5.9 yards per play. Green Bay was able to find some explosive plays, and that was the difference. So that's the NFL, man. That's the thing, is no matter how good a team is playing on any given Sunday, you just don't know. They didn't have Aaron Jones, right? So this is what we have seen with Jordan Love. You kind of got to ride that roller coaster a little bit, but man, when he's playing, he looks well, and he's using his legs. That's a big part, I think, the success.
That was, he hasn't always, but
yeah,
because I've watched every minute of football in Green Bay this year. The biggest thing is that he's able to get the ball out to Christian Watson last week. That has been an aspect of their offense that they've really kind of missed. And obviously you've read and you've seen all the reports about how Watson has struggled with injuries and just struggled kind of just making his presence felt. That wasn't the case. Detroit, right off the bat, they did that deep post to him. It was a little bit of an underthrow by Jordan. Christian Watson's able to kind of wait and then out jump the 3 defenders that are around him. So that's a big part of the offense. So they can get that part. And you've got Jaden Reed. Unfortunately, Luke Musgrave's out for the rest of the year. But that's a big win for Green Bay. And if you look at the playoff chances they got, they're not that far off from making it right now. And it's going to be interesting to see how the next few weeks go for Jordan Love in Green Bay.
Yeah, I'm excited to see it. And I'm excited to see, even more importantly, how Detroit rebounds from this loss and what that looks like. And I think Dan Campbell's going to have those guys ready to play this week.
All right. I agree. Detroit is still a good team to me, but as a fan of Green Bay, that was fun to watch. Let's go to a couple more questions. We got Gerald. Hey, guys, please choose one quarterback. Kyler, Minshew, or Russell. It's Kyler for me. I sure hope he has Trey McBride this weekend, but I still like Kyler over the other two. Coach,
Yeah,
what are you?
as good as Russell Wilson has been playing and what Minshew can do in terms of ceiling, I still think that's not a great floor for Minshew because he can also give you 3 picks in a given week. So I'm still going to ride Kyler Murray. He gives you the rushing yards, and I think they're gonna have to throw the football, and you're going to see more negative game scripts. So I like Kyler Murray.
All right, we got one more question here, or actually two more. This one is from Gerald. He wants to know Jalen Warren or Najee Harris. This might surprise people, but I have Jalen Warren as my 20th running back, and Najee Harris is 23. What about you, Coach?
I've got Warren over Najee as well. I think we're starting to see the impact that he can make, and Najee Harris had some splash games, but I think overall it depends on script, right? If Pittsburgh can get ahead early and they're at the ability to run the football late in the game, I think that favors Najee. If it's a game that's close, which they've been in all year long, I think that game script favors Jalen Warren. I'll take the explosiveness of Jalen Warren over the prodding of Najee Harris. So especially and it's half PPR, so if it was standard, I'd lean Najee, but because it's half PPR, I'll take the extra half point on the receptions.
There we go. I like it. Let's go to one more question. John wants to know, Josh Allen's on bye. I need a quarterback. Should I go with Carr or should I go with Baker? Coach, I'm going with Baker against Carolina. Derek Carr's playing Detroit. You can say whatever you want about Baker Mayfield, but he hasn't played awful this year. He's actually someone they should feel pretty excited in Tampa Bay that they were able to come in and kind of plug in while they figure out what they're going to do after losing Tom Brady last year.
Was it Carr, Baker Mayfield?
It was Carr and Baker Mayfield.
Yeah, so I'm going to go Baker Mayfield. Give me the offense that has Chris Godwin and has Mike Evans and against the Carolina team. And then Derek Carr, we just talked about this earlier. Who's he throwing the ball to, right? You've got Kamara. You got Taysom Hill. We hope Jawan Johnson after that. Rashid Shaheed's likely out. Chris Olave's out probably with a concussion. Michael Thomas is already on IR. So it's a lot of dink and dunk. I don't think you're going to see a lot of vertical. Even against Detroit, who gives up a lot in the pass game, I would still lean Baker Mayfield against Carolina.
All right, let's get to one more question because your guys' questions are always more important than whatever we got to talk about. So Dan, hey brother, how are you? Hope all is well in beautiful Ohio. He's got a question and he's redraft. This is thoughts on Cooper Kupp. He's killing me. Any upside in keeping him over the next few weeks? I need total roster points. First thing I would say is who can you pick up in his place? Second thing I would say is can you get away with not starting him and kind of wait and see? The issue for me right now is Kyren Williams is back. And you look at what Sean McVay wants to do in that offense, and that's apparent. With him, he wants to force feed Kyren Williams. Kyren Williams came back, and it wasn't like he was even gone. A lot of people are like, damn, they did Darrell Henderson wrong. Darrell Henderson came in off the streets, played very well in Kyren Williams' absence, and then as soon as Kyren Williams is back, they cut good old Darrell Henderson. So what do you think, Coach? You think because I've got Puka. So there's another guy who struggled over the last few weeks. So going forward, what does that Ram offense look like, and should he pivot off of Cooper Kupp?
Yeah, it's a tough. I've got Cooper Kupp. I actually traded away Puka Nacua and Mark Andrews to get Cooper Kupp in that same league we're talking about before. And I'm 10-2 in that league and in first place. But I was buying the upside of Cooper Kupp, who was still injured at the time, and getting him before he came back. And of course, right away he had a couple big splash games. I'm like, this is exactly, why you go out and get a guy like Cooper Kupp. But I'm still in that holding pattern. Now, if you can find a Rams fan in your league or somebody that's desperate for wide receiver and you can try to trade him and find a guy you can put in your lineup every week with confidence, I think that's an option. But if I don't really have that choice, there's not really anybody else on the waiver wire I can go out and get. I get it. I'm still going to trust Sean McVay. I'm still going to trust Cooper Kupp. I think the more weeks he goes coming back from that nagging injury, I think he'll start to pick up. Cooper Kupp's not going to play like this for the rest of the season. There's going to be some splash games, and I think you're going to see Stafford lean on him a little bit more. But you're right. Having Kyren Williams back and going for over 200 yards in his first game back, and if you look at how he was playing before the injury, he was the same guy then too. And you're right. They're definitely running that offense through Kyren Williams. And for Darrell Henderson, hey, the guy wasn't on a team before. I'm sure he's okay taking a couple NFL game checks versus sitting at home, but they did him dirty. There's no doubt they did him dirty, man.
Well, I mean, it just further illustrates it's not a game.
Not for long.
It's not
right?
a game. It's a business.
Yep.
All right, hey, let's move on to a big game that came, and this is going to be fun over the next few years, and that's the AFC South with teams like Jacksonville and the Houston Texans and their resurgence this year. Jacksonville 8-3, wins 24-21, missed 58-yard field goal. We're talking about missing. It hit the middle post, bounced forward, no good. Jacksonville wins, but great game, and I'm really I can't tell you. You talk about rivalries over the next few years. You got C.J. Stroud and you've got Trevor Lawrence. That's going to be a fun rivalry over the next few years. And hey, both teams went on the road and beat the opponent this year. So great game. Was certainly a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun rivalry. I'll tell you what's nice is Trevor Lawrence also gets 6 carries, 47 yards, and a touchdown on the ground to go as 2 touchdowns in the air. But Trevor Lawrence was a guy we had as our faller. He was a guy I was really, really high on coming this season with Calvin Ridley coming back and Christian Kirk coming the year he had last year and Zay Jones bringing Travis Etienne fully healthy. And I really felt like Trevor Lawrence was going to have a monster year this year, and we haven't seen that. But over the last couple of weeks, 23 of 38, 364 yards, a touchdown. He's using his legs a little bit more. Ridley comes 589, a touchdown. So I think you're going to start to see Jacksonville play better throughout the rest of the season. But God dang, man, and I know we're big C.J. Stroud guys, but every single week you think, okay, it's going to be like, hey, the rookie's going to hit a wall. He's just not. He plays well every single week, and even when he seems like they're out, he still finds a way to keep them relevant against a team that coming into the season, Jacksonville, a lot of people are really, really high on. So it's going to be a lot of fun to watch those guys play against each other. For the rest of their careers.
It's already a lot of fun because, like you said, I mean, you got a 50-yard field goal that barely doesn't go in to decide the game. I mean, I was hoping for obviously overtime just to keep it going, but great game, great rivalry. Looking forward to watching over the next few years. All right, let's move on to our next game. Denver 29, Cleveland 12. 5 wins in a row now for Denver. 5. And in that stretch, they've beaten Cleveland, which is one of the top defenses, if not the top defense, a team that just came off a win over Baltimore, a win over Buffalo, a win over Kansas City. So Denver, man, whatever Sean Payton is doing, it's finally working because it didn't look like it was going to go down that road.
Well, here's what I'll tell you. First of all, you're starting DTR. He gets hurt, right? They got to go to PJ Walker. But when David Njoku is leading you in receptions and yards, look, the guy's a specimen. You see him on the football field, right? He's an absolute beast. Looks like he should be in a pro bodybuilding show when he retires. But when your 2 leading receivers in terms of receptions and yardage are David Njoku and Cedric Tillman, who combined for 10 grabs for 114 yards, and Mark Cooper gets 2 for 16, right? You struggle to run the ball like you're accustomed to. It's not surprising that Denver pulls this game out. But it took Sean Payton about half the season to figure out, a little bit less than half the season, to figure out what the identity of this team is going to be moving forward. You get Devontae Williams back. Russell Wilson now looks like he did. Not necessarily in his prime in Seattle, but a guy that's a very, very serviceable quarterback and what we thought we were going to get when he first went to Denver. Man, they're on the rise, man. That's a team that's going to be very, very tough out the rest of the season, the way they're playing on both sides of the ball. After giving up 70 to Miami, right? We keep referring to that, but
yeah,
this team did not go in the tank like some teams would have after that game. They've learned from it, and they've played really, really, really well lately.
When you looked at, I don't know if you saw the clip where they showed Sean Payton, maybe 1-5 at the point, and he's sitting there in front of everybody. He goes, I look back at what Detroit did last year. They were 1-6. They go on this incredible run because they started believing in each other, and he talked about how we just need to focus on the next play and believe on what we're doing. And they've done exactly that. So it's been good to see because I know a lot of people are already thinking, holy shit, is Sean Payton way over his head? Is this mess a lot bigger than a lot of people thought? And fortunately, it's not for the city and organization of Denver. All right, let's move on to our last game. Philadelphia 37, Buffalo 34. Man, I don't know if you want to call them the cardiac kids. I don't know what you're going to call them, but you better call them 10-1. And for me, his stats haven't been great, but what Jalen Hurts is doing, I know you picked him as his MVP both at the middle point at the start of the year. That touchdown in overtime and just him kind of finding a way after he played poorly in the first half, he's definitely the MVP for me. And good win by Philadelphia. But How many times can they continue to win like this going down the road?
Well, and we talked about this before we got on the show, but they're the Minnesota Vikings from last year, right? Obviously, a lot more talented roster and a team that preseason we expect went to the Super Bowl last year, lost to Kansas City, and I had them as the Super Bowl winners this year, just like I did last year. So, and as a Cowboys fan, it hurts to say that, but what Jalen Hurts, I mean, his first half, he was I think about 50% completion percentage, if that, and then he was only like 50 yards passing. He had to touch the interception, he had a fumble. It wasn't looking good, but in typical Jalen Hurts fashion, he got hot in the second half. That offense started clicking. He throws 3 touchdowns, including the game winner. And, Devontae Smith goes 7 for 106. And they're doing this without Dallas Goedert. That offensive line is the top 3 offensive line in the NFL. And Jason Kelsey is, I don't care what anybody says, that dude is the best center in the league. And I don't think it's close. And I love Creed Humphrey and what he's doing in Kansas City.
He hurt him, though. He hurt him on a couple, flinches. A couple of those penalties, you were sitting there going, oh, my gosh, is this going to really affect the outcome? Fortunately, it didn't. But, yeah, those 2 penalties.
You watch his kick out on the power rate game.
No,
his kick out on that.
Is there a better pulling center ever?
No.
He gets out there. Yeah, he is fun to watch.
But I'll say this. Philadelphia better figure out how to stop offenses from scoring, because that's not going to translate if you're trying to beat San Francisco in the NFC Championship game or Dallas in the playoffs, a team that can put up a lot of points. And if you sputter it all on offense, it's going to be tough to stay in games like that. And their only loss was crazy. Their only loss was a freaking Zach Wilson and the Jets, bro. Like, what are we doing? And he was terrible in that game. 3 picks in that game. So when you look at Jalen Hurts,
that defense is no joke.
Yeah,
it hasn't looked. I hate to divert, but New York's Jets defense hasn't looked as good as of recently, and I think that has a lot to do with it's hard to play your ass off play after play and see what you see over and over again with their offense. But I digress. Let's move back to the Eagles.
Yeah, it's a quality squad, man. I mean, I hate to say it, the tush push, and the 1-yard touchdown runs for Hurts, and stat padding, what everybody wants to try to do to take away from what the Eagles are doing. They talk about the calls. They didn't call the horse collar. They didn't call. Look, okay. I mean, you play the game, right? Players aren't dictating that, and I hate when teams use refs as an excuse. And so, even as a Cowboys fan, I'm not going to say that the Eagles are winning games because of the refs. I'm not going to say they're winning games despite Jalen Hurts having some struggles in a couple games. The guy's had a phenomenal season. He's the front runner for the MVP. And he should be. They're 10-1. The guy puts on an absolute clinic on how to handle the press. That guy is the most. All the credit goes to everybody else. I don't care to talk about me. It's one game at a time. We're here to win. He's got his game face on, it seems like, at all times. He's a tremendous leader in that organization. So it's going to be very difficult to knock the Eagles out, especially if they lock up the number 1 seed in the playoffs.
Do they have a better, I feel like it's almost like a triangle. You've got your general manager, and then you've got your head coach, and then you've got your quarterback. Is there any organization that is as good as Philadelphia is in those 3 areas right now? And, you got Howie, what Howie's been able to do both in the draft and both of the trades he's made. You've got Sirianni, who thinks, say what you want about the guy, but the guy is a hell of a coach. And then you got Jalen Hurts. I mean, they're set up for the long term.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie. Sirianni is a guy that if you met him in an alley, you just want to punch him in the face. But I love what he's done as a coach, and I love the only thing I would want to take. I love his passion. I love how much he cares. I love that he's a player's coach. I mean, guys want to play and run through a brick wall for that guy. The only thing I don't like is the arrogance to the crowd, and the arrogance towards the other teams, and those types of, to me, childish things as a head coach. You got to be better than that. That's going to come. He's young. That's going to come with experience, and there's going to come a point where that's probably going to die down a little bit. But I'm certainly, if I'm Howie Roseman, I'm not trying to change that guy for shit.
No,
but Howie Roseman has done an unbelievable
if you're referring
job.
What he did to the Kansas City crowd going underneath the tunnel.
There's multiple examples of it. I don't remember all of them.
Did you see? You know what I liked? Talk about engaging with the crowd. Did you see the clip of Mike McDaniels talking to the crowd last week?
I did. Yeah.
Are you cold? Yeah, I'm cold, but I'm also winning. I mean, just
yeah.
I guess it's the way you say it, because one guy is vilified for engaging with the crowd, and the other is, always talked about how he's so likable, and that's Mike McDaniel.
Well, one guy's talking shit, the other guy's cracking jokes with the crowd. That's the difference, right?
I hear you. I don't have a problem with it. I may not like him and some of the things that. I mean, look, has there ever been an opening press conference for coach hiring that was worse than his?
No, not that I can
maybe
think
Gannon's. Maybe Gannon's this year for Arizona, but that wasn't an opening press conference. That was just a him meeting in front of the team. But regardless,
that was a pretty bad one too. That was
regardless.
I remember that. Yeah.
It's a good thing we didn't judge him. All right, we are certainly not judging him on that press conference any longer.
He's done
all right. Hey, let's get on to our third. Oh wait, we got a question. Let's get to that one real quick. We've got good old John here wants to know. Back on Mixon. He's got Cooks or Mixon non-PPR. All right. Cooks or Mixon non-PPR. I don't know about you, but when you got to compare different positions, because most rankings that we look at, my personal rankings for week-to-week starters, I go down individual positions. So it's a little harder for me for some of the flex ones. But for me, when I look at this, my first concern is that Seattle has been really good against wide receivers this year. They've got pretty good DBs. So Cooks, who do you like, I guess? Cooks or Mixon? I have concerns for both.
Yeah, we'll get into the Seattle matchups. I've got the numbers on that. But I would. So Mixon's going to be your volume play, but a non-PPR, I like him better as an option in the passing game than I do as a runner right now. He's got to find the end zone to pay off. I think Brandon Cooks and what he's done over the last 3 games, especially in finding the end zone, I think in 4 of the last 6. We'll get into that. Believe it or not, I actually would lean Brandon Cooks. I think he's going to give you, even though it's non-PPR, I think he's a guy who can get you 5 for 60 yards. It's only 6 points, but I think he finds the end zone this week. So Mixon safer floor. I think Cooks actually has the higher ceiling this week.
All right, John, do with that what you will. Let's move on to our Thursday night football game. We've got, and you can break all that down right now. We've got Seattle 6-5 at the Dallas Cowboys 8-3. Who wins? I like Dallas. I like Dallas winning 35-21. Dallas -9. Over and under is 46. Who do you like, Coach?
Yeah, I got Cowboys 31, Seattle 17. Dallas has won 13 straight regular season games at home. They're playing better than anybody right now, and people can talk about the strength of schedule. They don't make the schedule. You play who's on your schedule. So I'm not going to take anything away from Dak and the team because they're dominating those teams. They're not playing down to the level of those teams. And so I've got Dallas obviously winning by 14. So they cover the spread at -9 and the over-under at 46. I got the game at 48, so I've got the over. As far as starts and sits goes for Seattle, let's take a look at their offense. They are 18th in scoring on the year, 26th in rushing yards, and 17th in passing yards. And I like to look at the last 3 games to see if those trends are comparable. They're almost the same teams. There's not really much of a difference there. The Dallas defense, on the other hand, though, is 4th in scoring points allowed on the season at 16.8, but only 12.8 over the last 3. 13th in rushing yards allowed, and 2nd against the pass. We've only given up 135.3 passing yards per game over the last 3. So when I'm looking at Geno Smith, Dallas is 7th in fantasy points per game and 2nd in passing yards allowed to quarterbacks. They've picked off quarterbacks 12 times this year. You know, Deron Bland breaking the record. He's got 5 pick sixes this year. So I don't trust Geno Smith. He's out for me. He's QB 19, which is a mid QB 2. I think there's better options out there this week. Only 1 game with over 255 yards passing in the last 6 games. Only 12 touchdown passes on the season versus 8 interceptions. So I'm sitting Geno Smith. We can go into Dallas Cowboys pressures and sacks and all of those things. They actually dominate up front. So running back room, Dallas is 4th in fantasy points per game, 2nd in passing yards allowed. Or I'm sorry, 7th in rushing yards allowed and 10th in receptions allowed to running backs. They've only given up 5 touchdowns on the ground, only 1 through the air. Zach Charbonnet is more of a PPR guy. If it looks like KW3, Kenneth Walker, is out. We talked about him early. Charbonnet could be a decent flex in PPR formats. I expect a negative game script. He could be utilized in the passing game, but he's not a must start for me. Kenneth Walker's out. Obviously, DJ Dallas and Kenan McIntosh. We're not touching those guys. Wide receiver room. Dallas is 3rd in fantasy points per game, 3rd in receiving yards, and 2nd in receiving yards allowed, only giving up 7 touchdowns. They are locking down wide receivers on opposing teams. DK Metcalf for the last 3 games has been targeted 30 times, but only 3 touchdowns on the season. So if I'm going to play a wide receiver in that game, it's DK Metcalf for me. Tyler Lockett, 3 games, only 22 targets, 16 grabs, 170 yards, only 2 touchdowns on the season. And then Jackson Smith and Jigba, he's wide receiver 41 this week. He's not hit 65 yards receiving in 12 games played. Only has 1 game with more than 5 grabs this year. So I'm out on Jackson Smith and Jigba this week. Tight end room, we talk about it every week.
Yeah.
It's a 3-headed monster. I'm not playing any of those guys.
No.
Combined, they've got 57 targets between the 3 of them on the year. So I'm out on anybody in the tight end room. On the other side of the ball with Dallas, the first in scoring, 13th in rushing, 4th in passing. That's on the season. If you look at the last 3 games, they're scoring 42 a game, and they're throwing for 335 a game. I don't expect that to continue necessarily this week, but they have outscored their opponents 193 to 85 over the last 5 games. Again, they're not playing the cream of the crop. I get it, but one of those games is Philly, and they did have 370 yards passing that game. Seattle's defense, 22nd in points allowed, 21st in rushing yards allowed, and 22nd in passing yards allowed. They're giving up a lot of yardage. I'm starting Dak Prescott. We don't need to go through all the numbers. We've done it. We've beat it up. We know how well he's playing right now. He's a must start. He's a QB2 this week. Tony Pollard, RB4, RB2 over the last 2 games. He scored in 2 consecutive games. I think that continues this week. So I'm starting Tony Pollard. Wide receiver room, Seattle's 19th in fantasy points per game allowed, 16th in receiving yards allowed, and 20th in receptions allowed, and have given up 11 touchdowns to wide receivers. So I've got CeeDee Lamb, who's wide receiver 1 since week 6. We can go through all the numbers there. He's a must start. Brandon Cooks, I talked about. Depending on what your roster is, we talked about Cooks versus Mixon. I just think that Cincinnati offense is so bad. I don't trust Mixon this week, and I think Brandon Cooks, wide receiver 7 over the last 3 games. He's averaging 6.3 targets, 5.5 receptions, and 95 yards receiving. And he scored in 2 of the last 3. So, and 4 of the last 6 games he scored. This week makes 5 out of the last 7. I think he finds the end zone again. Gallup and Tolbert, we're not touching those guys. As far as the tight end room goes, Jake Ferguson's tight end 11 on the season in PPR formats. I've got him as tight end 8 going this week. Last week, just 4 grabs on 8 targets for 67 yards. That game got out of hand, right? They didn't have to pass the ball necessarily as much late. Dak Prescott did not play in the 4th quarter, really. But he is tight end 5 in weeks 8 through 10 at 16.5 points per game. I think Jake Ferguson's a guy that I'm comfortable starting this week.
I like it. You could, if it was any other game, I would have got 3 words from you. But you put a Dallas game on there for you to break down, and we get a whole dissertation. Good shit.
Hey, it's the same breakdown for every game. This is how I do it, man. This is how we do.
All right. I'm looking forward to it. It's not often you see Dallas play on a Thursday. You talked about Dak Prescott.
Thanksgiving, right?
Say that again? Yeah, right.
Thanksgiving.
So, yeah, it had to be a week after the last time they played on a Thursday.
Right.
But it'll be fun. It'll be interesting to see. Dak Prescott, last week after his Thursday game, everyone's going, he's the MVP. Because he's played so well. I don't think that's going to be the case, but he's certainly played pretty damn good football this year.
Well, you're not going to get any complaints from me. I'm right there with you.
We got some big games coming up. I'm looking forward to the next time they face Philadelphia. But let's jump and get through these pretty quick. These are risers and fallers. These are guys that, we're looking at the playoff stretch. We got 2 usually most teams are going into the playoffs after these next 2 games. I know my home league is. You said your home league was. So, and our league that we're in together is. So these are guys that if you have to stream somebody or whatever the case may be, if you got to pick somebody up, we like them down the road. My first one, I'm sure this surprised nobody, but Jordan Love, quarterback 10 on the year, 5 touchdowns, 590 yards over the last 2 weeks, and wins over the Lions and Chargers. Doesn't have the greatest matchup going against Kansas City, but I really like his development. I feel like he's someone, if you're quarterback 10, that's a guy that you can feel like you can comfortably play in one quarterback and certainly in Superflex League. So Jordan Love is my first riser. 19 touchdowns on the year, 2,500 yards, same stats. We talked about it earlier at this point of his career as one Aaron Rodgers. Who's your first riser, Coach?
I like it. I like the Jordan Love call. You've been waiting for that one, haven't you?
I had it early.
Packer fan you
but
are.
Then I pretend I didn't like him for a few weeks, but now I'm back, baby.
We're back on the wagon.
There we
I
go.
went. It's only the first game back, but I went Kyron Williams, RB16 in total PPR. He's RB16 in total PPR scoring, and he's missed 4 games plus had a bye week. That's how good he's been when he's playing. He's RB2 in PPR points per game with 21.4 last week. after not playing for a month. Carries the ball 16 times for 143 yards while catching 6 for 61. That's 10.2 yards per touch, 38.4 PPR points last week. So I'm all in on Kyron Williams. And you said it earlier at the beginning of the show. We were talking about the Rams, what's going on there with Cooper Kupp when we had one of our questions. And that offense will continue to go through Kyron Williams as it should.
All right. Another guy that we talked about earlier, and that's my second riser, and that's Pat Freiermuth. 9 receptions for 120 yards last week. New offense went for over 400 yards. If Pickett's going to get right, the easiest way for him is to have a reliable guy in the middle of the field, and that's certainly Freiermuth. So really nice to see him, kind of develop like he has or like he did last week, and hope that continues throughout. Who's your second riser, Coach?
So I've got I'm going to switch my order. I'm going to save my third one for last. I think you're going to appreciate it. I went Trevor Lawrence as my second. He's QB2 over the last 2 games, 28.9 fantasy points over those. The only person ahead of him is Josh Allen. Obviously, a lot of that's with his legs. In the last 2 games, Lawrence has passed for 626 yards and 3 touchdowns, but he's also contributed 3 touchdowns on the ground, which I think is a big part. It tells us his knee is healthy. We've seen him do a little bit more than just a straight line running he was doing with that knee. He's made a couple moves. He hasn't gotten jiggy with it. I'm not going to put him in the elite Lamar Jackson type style runner, but he's certainly been using his legs and using them well. So he's led the Jaguars 6 wins in 6 of the last 7 games, and they're only lost to the 49ers. They're playing good football right now. A lot of that's because of Trevor Lawrence.
There you go. You kind of like to see it as the number 1 draft pick a few years ago.
Yep.
They are certainly looking better after kind of struggling there in the middle. Brandon Cooks is my last riser for the week. 16 receptions, 287 yards, 3 touchdowns the last 3 weeks. As a CD Lamb lover and a CD Lamb manager, loved that he kind of didn't have anyone else for a few years in Dak Prescott. But it is good for the organization, good for CD Lamb, and good for fantasy owners when Brandon Cooks is good. And he's certainly playing much better. I like him over the next 4-week stretch.
So let me get this straight. You got Brandon Cooks in your risers, but then you want to play Joe Mixon over Brandon Cooks this week.
Well, because I know what you said about the Seattle Seahawks and as far as their stats against receivers. Joe Mixon.
Volume, right?
We know what he's going to be. We know that he's going to get opportunities. Brandon Cooks has to earn it a little more with a CD Lamb on his team. So that if you got to sit there and you got a flex issue, I think Brandon Cooks is a great play. I know Brandon Cooks in my home league last week played for a team that we only have to start 2 with receivers. I wish we could start more than 2 because my wide receiver is pretty good. Receiver room's pretty good, but you can only start 2. So this guy played him the last couple of weeks and he's done really well. So yeah. I like Brandon Cooks, but it always comes down to who are you starting him over?
Yeah, for sure. That's why the start-sit questions are tough, right? You don't know who people have on their bench and who's available on the waiver wire. But yeah, I like the pick, man. You don't have to convince me on taking it.
Hey, I just did. You made me. You're giving me shit.
Yeah. Now I'm thinking about changing my pick. No.
All right. Hey, let's move on to yours, Coach.
My last one is it's time for Rashee Rice. Rice, let's get it. You've been pounding the table for him. We both liked him as a prospect coming out. Wide receiver 3 last week in PPR scoring with 24.7 points. You've been asking for the breakout game. You've been trying to call it every week for how many weeks in a row? We got
6,
it.
Baby.
That's right, baby. He's a season high 10 targets last week, 8 grabs, 107 yards, got it in the end zone with a tutty, and he scored in 4 of the last 6 games. Let's keep it rolling. I love Rashee Rice right now. He's finally paying off for us. You've been pounding that table all year, man. I love it.
I love it. You know who I thought you were going to go with? I thought you were going to go to the Green Bay route.
Christian Watson. I could have.
Yeah, no, and he certainly is a riser right now.
I could have gone Zach Moss
last week.
With Jonathan Taylor out.
Yeah.
There's a few guys. I felt like there was quite a few risers for me this week. The fallers were a little bit tougher for me.
Fallers are a little bit tougher, and some people are going to be surprised by my first faller, and that's Gus Edwards. Not that Gus Edwards, with all his touchdowns this year, he's been awesome. But you look at the uptick in play for Keaton Mitchell, and the fact that last week he had more carries, more opportunities, looks more and more like he's slowly taking over the backfield. So for that reason alone, I'm a little concerned about Gus Edwards going forward, just strictly because of Mitchell.
Got Keaton Mitchell, man. He is fun to watch.
He is.
So I hear
I
you there,
hate,
man.
I've told you this over and over again. When it comes to the waiver wire, man, if there's anyone I sniff, I'm doing whatever I can to get them. And to me,
Yeah.
to miss on a couple guys this year, it's really hurt. One of them was Kyron Williams, the other is Tank Dell, and now Keaton Mitchell. But knowing that they were just out there, and all it took was for me to open up the wallet and not get them, those are definitely misses. But it kind of happens. So who's your first faller, Coach?
Cooper Kupp. We talked about him, right? So
Yeah.
I've got him as he was wide receiver 5 in weeks 5 and 6, which is his first 2 games back, but just 5.3 PPR points per game since week 7. That's PPR points. That's not Cooper Kupp-ish, right?
No.
So in 5 games since week 6, he has just 12 grabs on 30 targets. That's less than a 50% catch rate, at 40% to be exact. 127 yards and 0 tutties. This is a guy that had an 18 touchdown season. Only 3 grabs on 5 targets for 18 yards last week with Matthew Stafford back. That's when you're like, okay, maybe the ankle deal is a little bit worse than what we thought. So I'm hoping now that this will be his 3rd game since that ankle issue. We start to see that 2nd game with Matthew Stafford back. I'm hoping he gets in the mix this week, but I don't know how you can have Cooper Kupp as a faller after what we've seen the last several weeks.
I feel the same way about Puka, and I don't know.
Yep.
I don't, because Puka, it would be different.
Which is crazy, not either one of those guys playing.
Correct. Well, correct. I mean, that's the issue. So that's why it makes me feel a little bit. It's for Dynasty. I don't have any Kupp. Oh, I do, and on some of my sleeper leagues, but in my home leagues, I don't have any Kupp. And at this point of his career, I don't think that I would ever acquire a Kupp at this point. But a Puka I do have, and my concern the last few weeks is this a Puka issue, or is it the fact that the Rams haven't had a quarterback other than a couple guys that they've tried to bring off the street while he was out? But then his first game back, neither one of them did much, other than a hell of a highlight where you see Puka make that great route. And then, okay, so here we go for Dan. Let's move down to Dan's question real quick. We'll stop. You guys at home, we'll see it now. He's going back to the Kupp. He could get Cooks or Rashee Rice over Kupp going forward. Do we want what are your thoughts there, Coach? I don't think I would take Cooks over him. If I'm taking a ceiling play, if we get this week, I'm playing Rashee Rice this week over Garrett Wilson. It's pretty close in my rankings. I'm doing it because it's tough to have a Garrett Wilson in the lineup every week and see the quarterbacks they're putting out there. So I'm taking a ceiling play, which seems weird to say, and playing Rashee Rice this week. Would you take Rashee Rice the rest of the year over Kupp? Because this is a redraft league, Coach.
Man, that's a tough part, right? You're talking about dropping Cooper Kupp, putting him on the waiver wire for somebody else to grab him if he pops this week. And I struggle with that because roster alignment's also not about what you're doing this week, but it's also about what are you doing to help other teams out. So I would be trying to find a trade partner before I would ever consider dropping him. But yeah, if you're in, so I've got a guy in a league that we're in right now who's 6-6 and his roster's loaded, but he seems to always play the highest scoring teams every week, right? And he's getting so frustrated. He was texting with me today. And he's kind of in that same situation with a player where he's like, hey, I could drop this guy. And I'm like, dude, you drop him, someone's going to pick him up. You can't. So these guys are asking me advice, and I'm in the league with them, right? And sometimes I got 2 guys asking me questions that are trying to trade with each other, and I've got to stay neutral. But it's a tough situation to be in. But if you're dropping Cooper Kupp, if you're going to do it, then yeah, Rashee Rice to me is the play because he has definitely set himself as the wide receiver 1 in that Kansas City offense, in an Andy Reid offense with a Patrick Mahomes at quarterback. Kelsey's not playing the way he was early in the year. I think we're starting to finally see that slow decline with Kelsey, as much as I hate to say it. Rashee Rice to me is the number 1 pass option. Now, I'm not saying he's over Kelsey. What I'm saying is he's the number 1 wide receiver option in that offense.
He had more targets last week.
Yeah, he did. So I would, if I'm going to do it, it's going to be Rashee Rice for me over Brandon Cooks, just like you. But I mean, I can't just drop.
See, it's easy. It would be easier for me to say this if I'm not going to see Dan face to face during spring break, because I wouldn't be surprised if Kupp turns it all around and we're sitting here thinking, what the hell did you do that for in redraft? But at the same time, man, for me, it's almost like a big play opportunity. Like I'm making a big move and I'm going for the win. I'm taking Rice.
If I have to win to get in this week, then it's a real consideration there. because I'm trying to get in the playoffs. But if you've already secured a playoff spot or you feel good about where you're at with your roster, I'm not doing it just to have a higher ceiling play for 1 week. But again, it depends, and it's where you fall.
I would also like to know, Dan, maybe you can screenshot it and text me your lineup and I'll look at it. But
Yeah.
are there any other guys that we can cut that are not Cup and just pick up Rashee Rice? And maybe put Rashee Rice in this week in a favorable matchup against my Green Bay Packers, and just kind of see
that I'd be okay with.
So
he wouldn't start any of them, he said. So even if he picks up Rice or Cooks, he wouldn't start any of them. So at that point, I'm definitely.
Oh, that's right. It's total roster, because he gets total roster points. So it's
gotcha. Okay.
So that changes things. Yeah, I would do Rice. Fuck it.
Yeah, I got the same opinion. I'm not dropping Cup. I'm just giving him the waivers for somebody. But if you're trying to play and trying to get in the playoffs, you need a splash play this week. Then yeah, you can go Rashee Rice. But I'm still going to say I keep Cup. But
all right, hey, let's move on. I don't even know where we left off. I think the last.
You've got your second faller, which at this point is Slim Pickens. But go ahead.
Yeah, second faller. I had George Pickens on here, which is kind of funny because we're talking about.
Wait, so my joke isn't any good now? Did you switch it up? I said Slim Pickens, and I said Slim Pickens to set you up.
No, that's it. That's it. I liked it. Right. I did miss it. I'm not switching, but when you look at what he did last week, it wasn't awful, and they are making changes. I think he had like 3 for 45 yards last week. I wish. I've seen people make trades for him where they're giving up future first rounders, and I just wish his route tree was a little bit better. And I certainly wish his quarterback play was better. So for that reason, I still think George Pickens is a faller, seeing where so many people had him ranked going into the season.
Yeah, this is where I wish, and of course I was a wide receiver coach, played it in college. I wish you could go to these practices and see. Because you talk about complete route trees. Well, sometimes that's based on type of offense teams run. They don't give you options to run other routes. But I would like to see what they're working on with him as a wide receiver and what they're trying to utilize. Because we all know I think you were an OC like I was too. There's certain plays you put in practice or you put in way before the season starts during spring ball. You throw it out there a few times in your skelly periods or your 7-on-7s and you kind of see what it looks like. And you're like, trash play. I don't like it. I'm not going to use that. I'll keep it in the back of my playbook for maybe later in the year. There's other ones you really, really like. I would love to see what they're using, what that practices look like with George Pickens. Is he a guy that's learning to run more routes and they're just not utilizing that? Is it where they've just said, hey, look, he is who he is at this point. We're 12, 13 weeks in the season. But you've got a new offensive coordinator. That's why I'm asking that, because is that guy seeing something that Canada was not utilizing? That because he has openly said, the Steelers have said they want to get George Pickens more involved. Well, let's see what that's going to look like.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, who's your next faller, Coach?
So my next guy, I've got Amari Cooper, just 8.9 PPR points per game over the last 3 games. You've got DTR, you got PJ Walker, and now there's talk about maybe Joe Flacco starting. At least he can push the ball vertically, averaging just 4 grabs for 49 yards with no touchdowns over that time frame, which is the last 3 games. And I just don't. DTR's in concussion protocol. He's only got 299 yards passing over the last 2 games, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. I've got Flacco ? If Flacco becomes the guy, even though he hasn't played, I know he can push the ball vertically. I know he can pass the ball. He can throw it on time. He can throw it in rhythm. I like Amari Cooper a little bit better there, but man, it's tough with the way that offense is rolling right now. Just 12 points last week, and Amari was barely even visible, which is 4 for 49.
It's so funny that there's 2 fallers in a row where it's based off of, at least for Pickens and certainly for Cooper, it's based off the quarterback that's getting the ball.
Yeah.
And if you listen to, I don't know which podcast it was this week, but I've listened to them all. You listen to one, and anytime you talk about expanding the NFL and making it a 34 or 36 league team, just look at the bottom 10 to 12 quarterbacks and say to yourself, can we really afford to add more teams? Because the quarterback play in the NFL isn't very good, and that certainly has affected both Cooper and Pickens.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? Running backs are not considered a dime a dozen. You can pick one up anywhere. You can pick them up late in the draft and plug and play. Quarterbacks struggle to throw a 15-yard out from the opposite hash, or struggle to throw, a post route on time, or struggle to get to your second and third read in the progression. I mean, it
Struggle
just
just
seems
to
like
handle
there's
pressure in your face. These
yeah.
guys all look good. There's 35 quarterbacks in the NFL that look incredibly good in shorts and t-shirt. They can throw the football.
Oh yeah.
But put them underneath the lights in that type of situation. Yeah, it's certainly a quarterback league, and there's just not enough good enough ones to make every player dynasty or fantasy relevant at times. All right, let's get to our last two fallers. We've talked about them a lot tonight. I promise these guys were already set. It wasn't based off the first question we got of the night. But my last faller is Joe Mixon. You get into age, you get into his contract, and you get into his decline play.
Wanting Chase Brown to get reps, which you touched on earlier.
It's just if they were winning, he'd be great for redraft, but for dynasty and everything else, and especially since they're not playing well right now, he's not someone that I would be looking to acquire. Who's your last faller, Coach?
So this is a tough one, man. Terry McLaurin. I want wide receivers here. It's wide receiver 43 over the last 3 games, 8.5 fantasy points per game. He's got just 13 grabs for 126 yards and no touchdowns during those last 3 games. He's only got 2.
Who the hell is Sam Howell throwing all these passes to?
Well, here's my next point. Right. Bingo.
Well,
Sam Howell's leading the NFL in pass attempts, but the Commanders' most talented wide receiver.
And their second one, the Hodson, hasn't been great either.
He's averaging 8 targets, 5 grabs, and 57.8 yards per game, 11.6 yards per reception. But they're throwing to Gibson when he's healthy. They've gotten Brian Robinson Jr. We've seen him get a big uptick
he's got
in passing,
78 yards at times,
which is crazy. You've got Logan Thomas, who's now back. You're using, Curtis Samuel's been used a little bit more in a couple games sporadically. It's like this offense. Yeah, we can throw the ball over the yard, but we're teaching our quarterback, you're going to go through your progression. I don't care where Terry McLaurin's lined up. He's a second read in this play. He's a third read in this play. Instead of doing what the good teams do and saying, I'm going to find ways to get Terry McLaurin the football because he's very good. And they're not doing it. And it's amazing to me. But at some point, wide receiver 43 over 3 games, I'm out.
Yeah, it's so funny. I never thought I would say that the Washington Commanders would have the number 1 passing offense in the NFL, and Terry McLaurin is a roster clogger. I mean, I can't play him. I can't trade him. I can't do anything with him.
Yeah, nobody wants to trade for that guy now. When he came out, he was an older guy coming out of college. I think he spent 6 years in college.
He's 28.
Yeah.
I just know he's going to die on not die. I hate how we use that term sometimes, but he's going to be on my roster until I have to cut him, which isn't going to be fun because former 3rd round pick out of Ohio State, great player, just unfortunate that he played in a time where Washington hasn't been very good.
What you need is for Terry McLaurin to have 2 splash games, because that 1 splash game is not going to get anybody to want to trade for him. You give me 2 back-to-back, I might be able to, at that point, sell him in Dynasty for a second for a contending team that's been hurt by injuries, needs a wide receiver 3 or a flex guy they can put in. That's the only chance you got.
I don't know how you are. I don't know what redraft does. When's redraft typically have their trade deadlines?
I've got them. I already had several in some of the leagues that I'm in. Week 12,
and
week
so
13.
Dynasty,
you
the
can't
same
even trade them
thing.
now.
My trade deadline was
earlier. Which I hate trade deadlines.
So
not a fan of it. Hate it.
Yeah, well, I kind of too, because especially going in today when I saw Trey McBride might not be okay to play this week, and I've got Kincaid on bye, and I'm like, what am I going to do? Fortunately, I was able to pick somebody up, but regardless, it limits your options. You can't. You're in a playoff contention, and you can't make a deal to make your team better when somebody goes out. It's kind of unfortunate. But everyone's worried about collusion. In redraft, I get it more. I get limiting trades late in redraft. But in Dynasty, when the other opponent is going to have to put out a lineup the next year, I find it hard to believe that they're going to, just throw a season or throw a dynasty away simply to help somebody else. But whatever.
I should have prefaced that in Dynasty. Yeah, I meant Dynasty only. You've got to. There should never be a trade deadline in Dynasty leagues.
Yeah.
Ever.
Well, Coach, there should never be an end of the show because it's not often that I get to talk football for an hour and a half straight. But I appreciate you. We're going to be back on Sunday morning, 7:30 Pacific time. That's 10:30 Eastern time. with start and sits. Please come in with your start and sit questions. We'll break down every game. We'll have our thoughts on who wins, the over, the under. Can't wait. Coach, appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you too, man. Have a good night, everybody.
All right. Peace out.